Good morning.
Good morning.
Today is lesson 25. I think last week I said lesson 23, but it was actually lesson 24. I guess I skipped over one. But last week we looked at what is an angel's job. We looked at protection of God's people in several different areas. Again, concentrating on and pulling out of all of this the fact that God uses the angels to bring about his salvation of his people, and that's typically in the plural sense, whether you're talking about Israel of old, whether you're talking about the church today. And even when we see accounts where that protection gets down to the individual, there's going to be a cause to look forward to where that individual's got some important work to do for that greater cause. And some of the ones that we looked at, of course, was Moses and Elijah and Elisha, and in the book of Acts, the apostles as a whole, and then Peter. We see that constant theme. This is about salvation, and today's lesson is going to take up on that theme again in that line, because we've seen what happened in the book of Daniel in particular. Daniel's an amazing book because Daniel, the historical account of Daniel, takes place in the time of the exile. Whether it's under the Babylonians who destroyed Jerusalem, the Medo-Persians who destroyed the Babylonians, or getting even down toward that Grecian period, though Daniel doesn't get down there. He prophesies about the Grecian period, and then the Roman period, which lasts for like 470 some odd years after the birth of Christ. Prophecies going down that far, at least, about what's going to happen to the nations involved with the nation of Israel, and finally that kingdom that God establishes that will never be destroyed. Okay? And in this section, when Daniel's in the lion's den, there's an angel with him, right? When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the fiery furnace, there's an angel with them. Okay? But again, we're looking at the protection of God's people as a whole. Something's coming out of this, and as part of the angel's job, the angel watches over man, over mankind, and does this in a couple ways. Number one, again, God's people in particular, but also I think we'll see that watches over men as witnesses of what we do, how we conduct ourselves on this, in our time on this earth. So, again, what is an angel's job? Well, to watch man, watch over man. Daniel chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. That's verse 13. Verse 17, excuse me. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men. The Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. Now, this is in reference to Nebuchadnezzar's second dream. All right? First dream, the golden, or the statue, right? Golden head, silver chest, bronze belly or midsection abdomen, then the legs and the feet of iron and clay. That represented the Roman Empire. All right? But this is the second dream. Remember, who was that head of gold? That was the Babylonian kingdom, and that was Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, because of that dream, now he's had some interactions here. When you're talking about the fiery furnace episode and such, all right, he's had some interactions and he understands about God, but still, he's king. And he's got some pride going on there, doesn't he? And if he thinks he's pretty good, he's pretty great, right? So his second dream is a dream where, in the interpretation of it, he's going to be driven away from men for 7 years, and he's going to live like a beast out in the field, eating grass for 7 years, and his hair is going to grow, and his fingernails and is going to get long. And he's going to be out there for 7 years until finally one day he looks up and he recognizes that God is in control. Now when that happens, he comes back and he's reinstated on the throne. But that's the essence of this dream, okay? But you look at the last part of that, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was something great. He gets humbled and then comes back and sits on the throne once again. But who's in control? God's in control. Now this is a very important passage for the founding fathers of our nation. They really believed in this. They believed in a lot of the basis of the revolution was the Bible, that men need to be free, okay? But they believed that God was in control, and if it was God's will that a form of government should come where it would be from the bottom up, then we'll give it a try. It will come about. And of course it did. So this tells us something. I think there's another passage, can a nation rise or fall and God's hand not be in it? Because you look at that succession of nations, God's hand was in it. But who was there watching? Who was there watching over and perhaps in a providential way making things work out to lead these things into being the way God wanted them to be? Well, it's these angels. Why was it necessary? Well, because there were enemies, right? There were enemies in Babylon. How many times do we see in those books where it's getting about to the point where Daniel's going to be destroyed? The princes like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going to be destroyed. You get down to the book of Esther, and you have a man by the name of Haman. What's he want to do? Destroy all the Jews. Okay? Why would he want to do that?
controlled?
Well, some of it's controlled, but if you go back and look at it, he had a distant ancestor who had been a king, who had been destroyed. And a kingdom taken over. Was it the Haman was an Agagite? You go back and trace that back, and you'll see that lineage there, and that formulated his hatred for the Jews and wanting to destroy all of them. So you have those instances here. But not only do you have that, you have Daniel being at this time very close to that 400-year period when there are no prophets. Now after Daniel, you have Zechariah and Malachi are the last of the prophets, and they're down in that time of Esther, which is, depending on which calculation you use, somewhere like 100 years later or maybe 50 years later. Now you got 400 years of silence, no prophets. So Daniel is setting up and telling the Jewish people, the Israelite people, who some of them have gone back to their homeland. They haven't reestablished everything yet. What's going to happen in the next 400, 500 years? What's going to happen to the people? Okay, you understanding what I'm saying? Daniel gets to tell them that, right? Some of the prophets have talked about some things, like Isaiah, 150 years before, 250 years, no, yeah, 150 years before, has told them about the Messiah coming, to be born of a virgin, okay? But what's going to happen to the nation? What's going to happen? So you have these prophecies about the different kingdoms. Things are going to be moving along. Things are going to be changing. God's going to take care of his people, all right? But you're not going to have the prophets there all the time. You've got to rely upon keeping the Word of God. Follow me? All right. So let's go to the next one. We're getting down to that end time. To the end time of the Jewish nation. Chapter 12, starting with verse 1. I guess it just is verse 1. At that time, what time? What's the time of the end? The end of what? The Jewish nation, right? Michael, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And that's a very difficult thing. But to comprehend, to understand, you don't have a whole lot of information on this. But who is Michael? He's an angel and he is an archangel. But apparently he's one of these watchers. Okay? He's mentioned elsewhere in the Bible, correct? Where?
About the devil and the devil fighting the war.
Special book of Revelation, right? Book of Revelation. All right. So, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. Okay. Where have we heard something like that before? A time of trouble such as never been since there was a nation till that time. And there shall be a great tribulation like has never been before and never will be again. Where's that passage at?
Revelation.
No?
All of Jerusalem.
Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the nation of Israel, Judah, end of that system. Follow me? Because that's what I've always talked to you about, right? Somebody says, well, we're in those times of tribulation. Yeah, the end must be coming. This has got to be the tribulation. No, Jesus said that's AD 70. That's when Rome destroys Jerusalem. That's Jesus' interpretation. I'll go with Jesus before I go with anybody else. Okay? So, but at that time, your people shall be delivered. Your people shall be delivered. What does that mean? The nation's going to be saved?
The Christians.
I'm gonna say the Jewish
Believers.
Christians.
Okay.
God's people.
God's people, the Lord's people,
Right.
are going to be delivered. How did the Lord deliver people in that time?
In this time,
Yeah, that
pre
this prophecy's about. That he's been told about. Think about it. What did we just have a couple weeks ago? And what was the purpose of the birth of Christ? Name him Jesus. Why?
Because he's God's,
You're getting it.
my brain fog. God be with you, Emmanuel.
You name him Emmanuel, but you shall name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. What happened when he died on the cross?
He took the sins.
All those Old Testament people who were faithful, their sins were washed away. They were delivered. And everybody else now who believes and obeys and is faithful unto death is delivered, right? God's people. Daniel was God's people, or the Lord's people. See how that fits in there? But at that time, your people shall be delivered. Now, let's take it on faithful people. What have I told you? What happened when Jerusalem was destroyed? Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24? When you see the abomination of desolation in the place where it does not belong, what are you supposed to do? Run. If you're on the roof of your house, don't go in your house to get anything. Just run. If you're out in the field, don't go back in the city. Run. And woe to the women who are pregnant and pray that it's not in winter when it occurs. Well, if that's the end of the world, what difference is it going to make? Well, it wasn't the end of the world. It's about the destruction of Jerusalem. And the disciples, Christians, who remembered that, when they saw the abomination of desolation in AD 70, you know what they did? They ran. They ran, and they were saved physically from the destruction of Jerusalem. So you got a dual meaning there. But does that make them the Lord's people? Because they obeyed. All right. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. What book's that?
Book of Life.
The Lamb's Book of Life. And that's in the book of Revelation too, isn't it? Okay? So that book was even being kept before Jesus came to this earth. There's a record being kept. Who helped keep that record?
Is it mentioned in Genesis, the book of life?
I don't know that it's mentioned.
How far back is it mentioned? You know, the tree of life and all that, it all leads up to the book of life. I don't know.
As far as I know, this might be the first instance that the book of life, and it doesn't even say book of life here. Everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. Well, we know now because it's revealed to us in the book of Revelation what that book is, the Lamb's Book of Life. And your name can be written in it when you believe and obey, and your name can be taken out of it if after you believe and obey, you stop believing or you stop obeying. Right? Yeah, see, God agrees. It's the angels. No. But you understand that. So in reference to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and it's referred to by Jesus in Matthew 24, 15 through 28. And listen, not only that, you read the whole passage and it talks about the times, times, and a half time. What's a time, times, and a half time? You know what that is?
Don't have a clue.
42 months.
Say that again.
It's a year, 2 years, and a half year. 42 months. And if you go back there and you look at it, it's not exact, but I think Daniel, in the writing there, it's like 1,335 days, which blessed are those who wait, something about 1,335 days, but if you wait 1,342 days, you're going to be all right. Times. So when you get into the book of Revelation and you're looking at times and a half time or 42 months, you know you're looking not at a very short period of time like 10 days. You shall have tribulation for 10 days. It's a little longer period of time, like 3.5 years. Still figurative language, right? But nothing like 40 years. Okay, any questions on those? But again, the watchers. He has charge of the people. He's watching. There's another passage, and I think we talked about it before, where Michael says, I would have gotten to you sooner, but somebody was resisting me. So I got here as soon as I could. Daniel is a very, very rich book. And now, you talked about Josephus before, right, Danny? You take the book of Daniel and the book of and some of Josephus' writings and line them up, and you get perfect dates for when these things are happening. Proof of the Bible being, how do I want to put it? It's not because of Josephus' writings that it's true, and Josephus is giving you the evidence of the truth, okay? We should believe God's word because of God's word. All right, so Luke chapter 15, verse 10. Jesus said, "Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Before that, there's a passage, there's joy before the angels over, more so over one sinner that repents than over 99 just who need no repentance. So there are a couple different sayings there. Did you have a question or? No, okay. A couple different sayings there, but I chose this one to look at because there, again, the angels, there's joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And that's telling us that they're witnesses to the lives of human beings. They're witnesses to our lives, that they're kind of watching everything and seeing what's going on. And there's even a passage in, and I didn't put it up here, 1 Peter, about salvation and what the prophets wrote and things that the angels desire to look into. Okay? They want to know what about God's plan for human beings because there's no plan for redemption for the angels that sinned. But for us, there's a plan. So they're looking into that and you know, they're amazed, I guess, by the grace of God for human beings. So they're witnesses to these things. And here, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 10, that is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head, because of the angels. That's confusing. Why is that confusing? She ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Because the angels are watching? Is it talking about heavenly angels? Is it talking about human messengers?
Well, everywhere else, women are told to be submissive and not, well, that's not right either.
Yeah,
Well, women
in submission.
partially, you know, women to women's one thing, women to men's another, women to children. We'll understand that. But the basic premise is that women are to be submissive, quiet during
Corporate worship.
they're not to lead men in worship
And that's what we've understood that for
ever.
20 centuries now. Yeah, some don't agree with it, but that's how we've understood it. But because there are other passages that actually state that in what, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy? Okay.
Second.
But here's the,
But that's the stand that we take. We don't take this stand of women being powerful. We know how powerful women are. Women are the backbone of the church, I believe.
Amen.
right. But this isn't even necessarily about public worship here, is it? No. So the problem we have is the problem that I have is understanding head is used here. Follow me? Because it's the same Greek word all the way down through here. All right? So the head of Christ is God. The head of man is woman, or the head of man is Christ. The head of woman is man. Okay? The head of every man is Christ. Okay? So you can line it out. God, Christ, man, woman. head. Okay? If a woman prays with her head uncovered, well, who's the woman's head? Man. If she prays with her, and the English Standard Version, you go back and you look at it, her husband. Okay? The head of the wife is the husband. Okay? Doesn't make it generic, it's specific, husband and wife. How does a woman pray with her husband uncovered? Because it's the same, the word head's the same. See what I'm saying? And if a man prays with his head covered, how does a man pray with Christ covered? You see what I'm trying to figure out? Now, authority, I think that's just a problem in culture. Because, Karen, hold your left hand up. Is there a symbol of authority there?
My wedding ring.
Yeah. You ladies have, yeah, okay. So you're wearing a sign, you're wearing a symbol that says you are married and you have a husband. But what if you decide one night you're gonna slip that off and go out and go partying and whatever? What if perchance you come upon an angel? And I'm putting that in quotes because that might be a human messenger too. See what I'm saying? Could that be part of what's being taught in 1 Corinthians 10? When you pray, are you praying for your husband, for his success and all those things, or you see what I'm saying? There are things.
Well, is that symbol of authority the covering of the head? The
I
covering
think
on the
it
head?
was for them, because if a woman back in cultures, and sometimes it was different in different cultures, if a woman went around without a covering on her head and maybe even a veil, she could be confused with a prostitute. And if a woman said, I'm just not going to play by the rules of culture, society, boom.
You can see that in the Puritan religion back in the 17th century with the 7 witch trials, that they defied man. Oh, you must be possessed by the devil.
Yeah. We can set that aside, but I just let you know things that I'm looking at and studying, trying to get it into perspective here. But it makes the own. That would only make sense if being angelic angels, if they're watching to see, is man submitting to God's rules, and are women submitting to God's rules or authority, the way things are lined up? You understand what I'm saying? watching and reporting back to God, because we know it's not going to make any difference. That's why when we go back to Genesis chapter 6, that's why I tried to explain before why those are not angels, those sons of God back there, and demons that come in and produce offspring. They can't do that, okay? Those sons of God were sons of Seth, who intermingled then with Cain and other, and drew them away from God. All right? Now, at that time, there were a lot of missionaries, shall we say, going around in the church, okay? And, hey, they needed to know who was husband and wife, you know, in these situations. That can make some sense too. But the missionaries going out preaching the gospel, they ought to have been taking care of being careful for themselves too, not doing anything wrong. Which makes sense if you go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, right? There's some bad things going on in the Church of Corinth. They even had a man living with his stepmother. Okay. But again, a watcher. Going back to what we're saying. So think about it. Think about it. Study a little bit about it. Let me know what you come up with in your studies. Okay, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 16. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of godliness. He, talking about Jesus, was manifested in the flesh. The Word became flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, right? Seen by angels. But that word seen can also be translated cared for. Okay? When I was sick with the COVID, my wife was seeing to me. She was caring for me. She was fixing me soup and giving me pudding and all that kind of stuff. You see, and if you go back and you look at the definitions of the word used there, cared for, and you think of the time that Jesus was cared for by the angels, okay? Right after the temptations, right? He'd not eaten for 40 days and 40 nights, okay? The angels came and cared for him. Probably right after the resurrection, angels present. Which goes back to Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. And what a lot of people tend to do is say, well, see, that he's going to send his angels to be my guardian. But that's not what that says, is it? Who's that talking about? That's talking about Jesus. They, on their hands they will bear you up lest you strike your foot against a stone. Where's that passage in the New Testament? And who quotes it?
Matthew 4:6.
Matthew 4:6. Who quotes it? The devil quotes it. And he does what? Misquotes it. He misquotes it. Now it's true to a degree, okay, that the angels were going to care for Jesus because he's got to go to the cross. So he's not going to stumble and die ahead of time. He's going to the cross. But Jesus says, don't tempt God. All right? All right, yeah. Because what did Satan want Jesus to do? Was that where he wanted him to go to the temple and jump off the pillar so that the angels would catch him? You don't tempt God. There are a lot of people out here that would tempt God. Don't tempt God. That was for a special purpose right there. Okay. Well, so that's all I have. And other than that little side trip over to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, I think we did all right. Yeah, but again, that is one of those passages. Is this human messengers? Is this others? Why do you need that symbol of authority? How is the word head used there? When God, Christ, and man are head, and then head uncovered and head covered. I think it's a lot of things to think about. Okay? A lot of things to think about. Is there a change in head from, Christ is the head of every man, and then a woman praying with her head uncovered, when a man prays with his head uncovered? I really want to dig down into that further.
I'm thinking about there's human nature involved here. When you take the restraints away, human nature goes into high gear.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have seen it, it's kind of a backside of the news. A sheikh in, I guess, Saudi Arabia has his little kingdom, and he has backed off of the strictness of Quran about the head covering and all that, and the veils, and a little bit. And he went as far as to recently have a rock concert in the desert. Did you read about it?
I heard something.
Off came the burqas, went on the tight pants and the crop tops, and the there was alcohol, drugs and alcohol involved. It was a Woodstock in Saudi Arabia, and it was as though he was testing the waters.
Mhm.
Well, human nature sure muddied the waters. As soon as he gave the liberty, human nature took over,
Yeah.
which is, I think, a good reflection of this in our time.
I think so. But the angels are still watching, and God is watching too.